If we were to reference Ken Gordon to cricket, he would be an all-rounder. But his stint as West Indies Cricket Board president was all but a brief one, a short chapter in his biography. Instead, his media prowess as a trailblazer and pioneer of local broadcasting ensured that all Trinbagonian broadcasters post-independence had to follow in his footsteps. But there was more to the man than just the media as well. In the last decade, he served as Integrity Commission chairman, opening himself up to public scrutiny in a highly politically charged society. Now nearing 90 years old, Ken Gordon is still on the field of play. This is ViewPoint. Mr. Ken Gordon, welcome to ViewPoint.
Thank you.
You're 90 years old.
Not yet. Just don't rob me of a few weeks.
A few weeks.
Yes, I will be on Juve morning. Juve, I'll be on the Monday.
Your day is still controlled by a clock. You've got meetings at 6:15 in the morning. Did you see yourself working at 90?
Well, I've never seen myself not working. I didn't actually attach a number to it, but I've always thought of myself as somebody working, I suppose, and hope I'll do so until I leave.
One of your first jobs was as a radio announcer. You went on to pioneer television here in Trinidad and Tobago. It has vastly changed, not only the media landscape, not only television, not only radio, but journalism. When you look at journalism and reflect on where it's come from, what do you make of the state of journalism in Trinidad and Tobago and its current climate?
From a technological point of view, of course, it's advanced tremendously. I'm disappointed at the standards of the radio side of it. I don't think that radio has maintained its possibilities in terms of the growth of the industry. It could have done so much more than I think it's doing now. I think the standards have fallen, but I don't think people seem to aspire to change the standard. It seems to be a fit into what the environment is, or maybe we should put it another way. Radio may well have been responsible for some part of the climate we now have. So my answer is a mixed one. I think the media, but in terms of the role of the media, in terms of the role it plays, I think by and large we're fortunate in overall terms to have a media that remains independent. And whatever mistakes may be made or whatever may be said of it from time to time, I think it is playing its role in a very positive way when you look at it objectively and make an assessment.
You talk about an independent media. You founded what would be known as really the first real independent, not state-sponsored media outlet in Trinidad and Tobago. Are you disappointed that we don't have much more of those than when it was founded back in the 1960s?
Well, remember, independent media have to exist in the climate in which it can survive. And at the time that we gave licenses for something like 28 or 38 stations, I think it was excessive myself, because people got licenses who had no experience in radio, who had no appetite for learning anything about radio. Their whole thing was, how could they survive with this license? Over time, niches have developed, and there's still, fortunately, one or two serious stations. But the standards of broadcasting, that's what's disappointing to me.
When you say standards, what do you mean?
I mean, what you hear coming over the air, generally that's disappointing, because I don't think that people are made to understand that when you are broadcasting, what you do reflects on a society. And very often that happens. And so often that is responsible for perpetuating bad speech or crude speech. Some of the language you hear around, I wouldn't say radio is responsible for it, but it certainly feeds it. So if I sound like a complainer, I'm not, but I do, on the one hand, feel very proud that radio has maintained its independence in terms of expressing itself and its view and so on. Well done. But in terms of how people express themselves, in terms of, I see you squaring your shoulders as though saying, me too? No, but I didn't mean to do that, because I can see from the way you've been carrying yourself that you're very busy on wanting to go to the next step. But the straightest answer I can give you is to say my response is a mixed response, but it errs on the side of saying better this way than the other way.
But Mr. Gordon, you yourself, in many ways, had to revolutionize and evolutionize with technology. You started in radio in 1949. Then you opened up into television. Now we're at a crossroads, or perhaps gone down a road, where television and radio are slowly creeping out of our system and social media has taken over. Having been in this thing for so many decades, what do you make of the social media revolution?
Let me admit that I am not one of those who follow it very closely. I am not in love with and don't keep pace with the technology. I have used it fleetingly, and if my family were here, they'd tell you very, very fleetingly. But I'm not really one who follows it. The truth is, I'm so caught up with what I do that when I have time and I read, I love to read, between those two things, I really don't have a lot of time to get into something new and different and something that I'm not particularly drawn to. I respect it, I see the importance of it, and I realize it's the future, but I don't think of myself as much of the future as of one who is doing the best he can with the present.
Talking about the future of journalism actually goes to your school. It's called the Ken Gordon School of Journalism. When you look at the future of journalism and the current state and standard of it, are you happy with the journalists that are coming out of that school? You've been to a number of the graduations. I was one of the graduates that you gave the certificate to.
I remember. Well, I don't interact too often with too many of them. You are an excellent product. Good for you. But I've been very struck by the number of people who have met me in the street and who could tell me things about my life. When I say, but how do you know this? Because of the book. Because my book was used in the school. And as a result of that, young people that I don't know can tell me things that I never thought they would remember. So that the question of what I make of it, I think the school is very valuable. I think what I see them doing and what I hear from the young people who read the book, they're producing a good product. Whether you find that contrasting a little with what I said earlier about the standards, let me clarify that. Many people who come out of COSTAT, perhaps, may go into fields that are related, communication fields, as distinct from purely radio fields. So often you hear people in radio, and the language, the lack of, you hear expressions that are not vulgar, but approximating it. And it's not, you don't get the feeling that young people who are going onto radio ever have the following morning to account for any part of their performance. And I suspect it is because the people today who are managing radio stations are not themselves some of them are not themselves broadcasters. And therefore, these are not things that would register with them, and they don't pick it up, and therefore it has a way of moving at its own momentum. So that I didn't mean to denigrate the role of COSTAT, because I think what they're doing is very important. I mean, I've heard one or two people say to me, who I would never have thought were interested in that. I'm going to do a course in COSTAT. And one or two people close to me who have said that to me, who I would have said, okay, that's not his or her field. But it's having an impact at another level. But there we are. I suppose nothing is ever perfect. You know, always have to be good with the bad.
When we come back, life after the media. How Ken Gordon opened himself up to public scrutiny and his service to West Indies cricket. It's less than a month to your 90th birthday. It's a reflective period in many ways for you as you near 90. You've been through the ebbs and flows of this country in all different sectors of our society. What do you make of Trinidad and Tobago in 2020?
Let me start with a little story, only because it happened a few days ago. I come to this van every morning, 5 o'clock. And on Friday, I lost my wallet. I was coming down, and as I opened the gate of my house to get out, something happened. I dropped for it, and I ended up putting my wallet on the bonnet of my car and fixing whatever I had to do. Bottom line is I drove off with the wallet on the bonnet of the car. And by the time I got onto the highway, on my way down to Port of Spain, coming down the highway, something did that across the windscreen, and I thought it was a folder or something somebody made, you know, the pamphlets they give out, maybe something stuck on the windshield. So I thought that, oh, you know, it was only when I got back home and I reached for my wallet, I realized what had happened. The wallet was lost. I drove back, didn't find it. Cut a long story short, I was in a terrible mood of dejection when I thought of all that I would have to go through to get certainly the cards and everything else, ID, everything else. And then about 4 o'clock, I got a call from my wife. A lady from Las Lomas has your wallet. She's found your wallet. I got back to that. I wouldn't tell you the difficulty of getting it and so on. Her son was a constable who saw the, but he was so tied up he couldn't do anything himself. He drove to his mother's home in Las Lomas and said, see if you could find who the owner of this is. They did. Through the School of Journalism, they remembered my name associated, called that, traced it back, and my wallet is absolutely intact. So I start by telling you that because I start by saying we still have some very good people in this country. We have good people in this country, and that's where you start. Okay, you can be critical of some of our politics, but much of it is good. And what we have to do is to identify where the weak spots are and address them. I'm beginning to feel now, even though the numbers will not support what I'm about to say, but we are identifying the causes and getting to them. I'm seeing now that very often when crimes occur, far more quickly you're hearing about who has been arrested, who is being taken in. Things are beginning to happen. It's a long way from the answer, and my argument could be easily defeated by the actual numbers, but I'm hopeful.
Your job as Integrity Commission Chairman was, in many regards, to begin that process of cleaning up Trinidad and Tobago, just on a public front, just on a leadership front. When you look back at your time as Chairman of the Integrity Commission, in hindsight, would you have done anything different?
Absolutely not. That wasn't something I enjoyed. And I was fortunate in that I had a good team. I mean, really first-class people. And we were beginning to make inroads.
But a deputy chairman had resigned under your chairmanship.
Not under mine, no. I had, no, remember, this is after I had resigned. What are you talking about? The incident when Ventor Bento was my deputy, and he and I got on very well because we all very much the same way minded, and I had a great pleasure in working with him. And to my mind, he's the man who should have replaced me. But please don't ever run away with the idea that his resignation was made during my tenure.
But as well, there was several controversies that plagued your chairmanship.
There was one controversy that plagued my chairmanship. One. And that was the one with
Attorney General Anand Ramlogan.
No, I'm talking about the Prime Minister when he came to my residence.
Prime Minister, but the Attorney General also did call for your resignation while you were chairman for not having been informed that he was being investigated. So those things, when you look back on those things surely you would have perhaps done differently.
No, I don't. Sometimes when some people call for your resignation, it's a badge of honor. It's not necessarily what you regard as a crisis.
But didn't that entire situation where the Prime Minister was in your home, how much of an effect did that have on your life, especially on your chairmanship?
It obviously had an effect because people tend to believe what they read. But when you know the reality is totally different, you can't spend time worrying on that. The circumstances were so straightforward in that the Prime Minister...
Well, the opposition leader at that time.
Opposition leader at the time. Tried to get me in the morning. We've never been friends. I mean, I know him. I had a working relationship even from the time I was in Parliament when he started with the PNM as a senator. But we were never friends. But we had a respect, I think, basically for each other. And when he tried to get me, I returned his call, or was it the other way around?
But given the two portfolios, Mr. Gordon, the chairman of the Integrity Commission and the opposition leader, when you look back on that, do you still see that as something that the country would not have viewed as a conflict?
First of all, the one thing you have to do is to be true to yourself. And when a man who is the leader of the opposition calls you and says, I have something urgent that I want to speak to you about, he is representing at least half of the people in the country. And he tells you, I have something urgent that I want to see you about. To tell him, no, I am not going to see you, you have to say, why? This, first of all, he has a position of respect.
And I get that, but one of the arguments that was brought forward is that the then government, which was the People's Partnership, said that, well, for complaints, you have to go through the registrar's office.
For what?
To lodge a complaint with the Integrity Commission.
Sure.
And their argument was then that the then opposition leader, which is now the Prime Minister, Dr. Keith Rowley, should have gone through the registrar's office to get to you.
This is a matter that was being debated in Parliament, and he calls to say there's something urgent that he wants to speak to me about. My judgment was, okay, if he wants to speak to me, let me hear what he wants to say. If I had carried on a conversation with Dr. That's a different. He drove, he was on his way home, which is not apparently far from where I live. He drove, we got up from where we were, we walked into my study. He asked me what he had to say about whether there was a matter that was before us. I said, as you know, I can't discuss this, but I can tell you it's not a matter before us. Thank you very much. Fine. It did not take 14 minutes for that meeting from the time he got there to the time he left. And I would do that tomorrow. And more than that, if the positions had been reversed and the leader was the then Prime Minister, Bissessa, and she had called me, I would have done absolutely the same thing, because I feel that when people come from that kind of office, they are due a certain amount of respect. And if they say there's something urgent they want to see you, you must either have enough confidence in the judgment that your people have with you, or you shouldn't be in that position. I immediately wrote a note to say, I've seen so-and-so, he asked me so-and-so, I told him so-and-so. The following morning, I called the registrar in, I said, here, I saw yesterday the Prime Minister, he called me, this is what I say. I type an aid memo. That was done the following morning. So that there was no secrecy. Whatever was noised abroad was out of, I was about to say wickedness, but I'll say politics. And I'm not upset with them because they thought they had something and they made it a play. That's all right.
I just want to get your thoughts on Molly MacDonald, who was charged with 7 counts of corruption last August. Your Integrity Commission under your chairmanship cleared her.
No, I wasn't there then.
But 6 years ago, cleared her in 2013.
The truth is I don't really remember those circumstances. Generally, I remember that.
What were your thoughts when she was fired and when she was charged? Because your Integrity Commission would have dealt with her case.
Remember I don't remember the year that I was the president, but the issue as such, I candidly do not remember the details of her instance. I remember the name, I remember we may have had something to do with it, and I remember reference to the Integrity Commission, but I do not remember the details of what came before us. And if I commented, I would be misleading you.
Does the Integrity Commission here in Trinidad and Tobago still hold its essence in what it's there to do?
The Integrity Commission, and I said this publicly, and I made representations, needed teeth. It had no teeth.
A tiger without teeth, you called it.
Well, yes, it was being told you should do so and so, but not how you do it. And therefore, anything you wanted to get done through the courts or through some, you had to line up like anybody else and take your turn, and that could mean an end of time. So that when you create something like that and you don't give it the teeth to take it to the next step, you are sowing the seeds of failure. I don't think it failed because of the people we had in it, and I was very fortunate to have 2 or 3 very able people, both the Vice Chairman, Mr. Vento, and Dr. Lal Shan, and there were 2 or 3 others. And I had a first-class group of people, and we began to shift our emphasis on getting the word of integrity out to the schools. We had an excellent development thing which went on for 2 or 3 years, where we brought all the children together. They were beginning to think of integrity, not only in terms of stealing, but of in the home, or even taking it home. If there was bad behavior anywhere, from whatever level, they would do compositions on that. And that was focusing them on, unfortunately, some things which we see rearing their heads now in terms of all these domestic problems. Who knows how, if that had been allowed to continue to grow as it was growing, what impact that would have had on that very problem now. Because it was reaching into the home, it was reaching into the child who was playing a role when the differences occurred at home. But you've got to try these things when you're dealing with a problem like that. And I would think that solving the problem we have now of domestic violence is something that you have to find a way to reach into the home, into the habits, and to the lifestyle. You're not going to solve it by just laws. And that was one way, it was a beginning.
You saved West Indies cricket between 2005 and 2007. When you look at the current state of West Indies cricket, it's a lot worse off right now than it was 13 years ago. What do you make of watching West Indies now? You're still president of the Queen's Park Cricket Club.
In anything that you have good people and you have bad people, you have indifferent people, and you have people who work for themselves. And all organizations suffer from that like everybody else. I think the West Indies Cricket Board has suffered greatly from bad leadership for a period of time. And to be fair, not only in the boardroom, but that led to indifference in terms of how players were treated. It led to a lack of vision, a lack of organization, and we paid a heavy price for it. My concern is not that has gone. Let's hope it's behind us. We now have someone who we think is a more enlightened kind of person, certainly more enlightened leadership we're getting from him in terms of the things he's trying to do. We're seeing, for the start, a different kind of application. The occasions now where we see people digging in and fighting. We weren't seeing that before. We've always been gifted with class, strokes, beautiful. But after Lara, the descent was sharp. Now we're beginning to see signs that people are approaching the game differently. Do you know, I asked three key people, what do they think was the most important part of cricket, preparing the individual, preparing himself as a batsman? First of all, the three of them at different times all said the mind. Okay. Then I asked them individually, how would you rate the mind in terms of the other parts of the equipment? Wes Hall said 65%. Brian Lara said 72 or 70, something with the 70%. Garfield Sober said 94%. But the mind was what made the difference in the game. And do you know, we've not been having, I then asked a lot about trainers, and the 4 or 5 that I asked, none of them have been doing anything about the mind in terms of developing the player. How the player had to begin to be trained from early of application as a stroke, as this thing for hitting the ball. Of course, that's where the money is now, so you can understand that. But in terms of our lack of consistency, you cannot develop consistency if what you're trying to do is to make 100 runs in 2 overs. You can't. So the problem is recognizing what has happened in England with their academy, in Australia in their academy, who are the people in the 80s, when we were ruling the roost, went to the drawing board and developed the academy concept, which has been taken over by so many other people.
As you near 90, you're still president of QPCC. Would you ever slow down?
Would I ever slow down? Now, why would you want me to slow down?
Would you ever retire?
Of course. No, of course there are lots of things I'd like to do, but somehow events have not conspired to make that a factor so far. But I think the time is approaching.
Mr. Ken Gordon, thank you very much for being on ViewPoint. Really appreciate it.